There are many ways to play StarCraft 2, from a plethora of build orders to certain key playstyles. Any player can choose anything that fits him best. This is the beauty of StarCraft 2. Despite the fact that there are metas that generally produce better results, you can still try your own thing and be extremely successful with it. For Terran, there has always been a distinctive division between two completely different and unique playstyles. You could play Bio with Marines, Marauders and Medevacs, be super active on the map and showcase your impeccable microcontrol on every frontline you're fighting. Or you could take a different approach, a more slow but mighty and powerful in a straight-up engagement. Mech compositions are slow, they require good defense and turtling, and yet they have a certain advantage, mainly lack of need to micro every single unit excessively. In this video we'll cover the story of mech playstyle and how it evolved from the Wings of Liberty till Legacy of the Void. Now it's a common thing that's often used in a good number of games, however it hasn't always been the case. In StarCraft Brood War you had a good variety of supporting units such as Goliaths or Science Vessels, and it was extremely common to see many players spread out across the map with their siege tanks slowly encircling their opponents. But in StarCraft 2, Bio has always been the main playstyle for all Terran players. Not only does it give you more presence on the map, it's also much more flexible and allows for a greater showcase of skill and microcontrol. There's just simply more that you can do with Bio army in terms of increasing cost efficiency than compared to mech units. Apart from that, the nature of Terran upgrades suggests that you either go for one of the playstyles. You just cannot afford improving the attack and defense of all your units, and thus a player had to make a distinct choice between Bio or mech-based army. Combined forces were too expensive, and except for tanks, there was no other mech units in the army. In Wings of Liberty, the mech playstyle was a rare beast, and there were only a few esports heroes who were actively trying to explore this playstyle, improve it and make it really strong and viable for all matchups. The problem lay in the limited arsenal that severely restricted the capabilities of such armies. You could only build 3 units from the factory. Hellions were super squishy and they couldn't tank enough damage for other units. Siege tanks were obviously strong and very useful and it's the core of the mech army, but you could be easily taken off guard by a 360-degree surround. Apart from that, the army composition was extremely vulnerable to air attacks. Forces were required to provide air support, but they were slow, expensive and took up a lot of supply. To defend against drops, mutas and other annoying creatures that assault your base, you really needed to invest extra cash into defense, from turrets to actually leaving quite a number of your own units at home to prevent any kind of base raids. If you managed to get a good foothold in the late game, you would face a new problem. Actually, you need to make separate upgrades for all your air units as well. This includes armor and attack, which obviously means that your air units are going to have a hard time against Broodlords, Corruptors, or any other kind of unit that can shoot up, like Marines in TvT. But the biggest issue was that you couldn't really split up your army effectively, and mech force was generally strongest at the peak supply. You simply couldn't move out with a few tanks, as this army was just too inefficient and would lose in terms of cost efficiency. The only option was to max out as quickly as possible and go for a big mech push with your massive task force before your opponent hit a late-game army composition. It was a big deal for ZVT because Broodlords countered mech playstyle easily due to splash-friendly fire from tanks who would shoot at broodlings and kill half of your army. Lack of mobility was the focal point that also prevented mech from being widespread on the pro level. It was regarded mostly as a defensive playstyle, and you cannot really win a war without your own offensive. It's a limiting playstyle in a sense that you just don't have many things to do with your APM and multitasking, and there is only so much you can do with Hellion drops. Lack of initiative ultimately meant that other players would have a better map control as well as a stronger economy. And remember, with mech you cannot really depend on your micro as much as there is simply not many plausible micro moments. You just siege up and enjoy the battle unraveling in front of your eyes. If you took a good stronghold and managed to chokehold your opponent's base, then you have your best chances. But if you got caught in the middle of nowhere, well, that's pretty much over. As for matchups, mech was naturally good against Bio-Terrans if you could organize a good defense, and it was something successful against Zerg players if you could be fast enough to strike a devastating blow before Broodlords. The hardest matchup was PvT, since there were many hard counters and tanky units such as Immortals and Archons. On top of that, there were High Templars who could even feed back Force, since the latter had mana and Wings of Liberty. Colossi easily cleared up the pathway for Zealots, and it was a really uphill battle for all mech Terrans. There was no real transition into Sky Mech as well, because battle cruisers were simply not good enough in most cases, and it was just a very expensive switch. Due to these limitations, mech army composition wasn't common on a high level, and yet players never gave up on the idea and wanted to push the boundaries of this playstyle. You would mostly mix it up in best of 5 or best of 7 series to throw your opponent off guard, but there were prominent players who were really dedicated to it. One of them was Goody, and he is truly a Wings of Liberty legend. He was the first to defy the common belief that you need at least 300 APM to be successful in StarCraft 2. Nicknamed Panzer General, Goody was using exclusively mech playstyle, and his APM rarely exceeded 100, but it didn't stop him from being quite an accomplished player. Of course, Goody never reached like the real top level of play, but he was present at major and premier tournaments and could easily cause an upset. What was amazing about him, literally everybody in the community knew that they are facing mech, and yet this Steel Magician always managed to outplay his opponents, even with their intel advantage. Mech playstyle was also popular in Ukraine and Russia, with players such as Strelok and Avars from Ukraine or Bratok from Russia often trying to experiment with tank sieges and mech blitzkriegs. As for Europe, Zane and Lucifron would often play with it. In a typical game, you would see a Terran player open with Hellions and Banshees for some map control and harass, later switching to tank and for production, with an occasional sprinkle of few Ravens for defensive matrix ability. Some other players such as Boxer or MVP were also seen using this playstyle, and they have several great moments like that.
There's some unit getting killed and being rebuilt all the time. A lot of Thors here in the middle.
Wow, uh-oh, here comes. It looks like the Ravens moving forward. Point defense drones. Oh, another Yamato gets planted, and now we start to see the Yamatos incoming for Rain. Rain really darting forward. Oh no, Boxer loses the ghost. No EMPs possible now. And there are the Yamatos going down. He's picking off one Viking at a time. Needs to avoid those Seeker missiles. Huge numbers of point defense drones. Very tense micro situation. Now we do see the big engagement. This could be the final battle. The Ravens on the wrong side, trying to move forward if he can get a big point. Oh, big Seeker missile could go off, but no. No, they're all out of energy. And it looks like in terms of the air battle, we do see 31 Vikings. More are falling for Boxer. Can he pick off all of the battle cruisers? And it looks like Boxer might come out on top in the skies, but the 7 Thors from Rain give him the victory there.
Yes, they do. The supply suddenly plummeting down to 37 from Boxer, 103 for Rain, and no more Viking advantage here for Boxer. And now we've got the Thors moving in and dealing a lot of damage. How is he going to be able to deal with that?
Oh, Rain with incredible patience, staying in all game long, and in that final engagement managing to plant the point defense drones that he needed.
Blizzard were interested in making this playstyle really viable on all levels, and in Heart of the Swarm they were trying to figure out how to improve it. There were several buffs that were really helpful, like combining air and ground upgrades in the armory and some tank improvements as well. However, mech army still lacked a good cheap mid-shield that would save tanks from the enemy fire. There were two options for that. First of all, in Heart of the Swarm, Hellions could now transform into Hellbats, making them a great tool against all bio units. They also move slowly, so you don't really need to adjust the speed of your army, and they will never go too far ahead of tanks. When first introduced, they were pretty much OP and had an insane damage and AoE radius.
Let's go. Add-on complete. Heading out. Get fired up here.
However, Hellbats didn't fix the issue with air supremacy, and they were still inefficient against non-light units such as roaches and stalkers. You still relied heavily on tanks and needed a death ball before you moved out. To tackle this issue, the Warhound was introduced. Let's just hear about it from the balanced team itself.
So the Warhound is the new factory unit. It's a mechanical unit. Its main role is the anti-air mass mutalist role like the Thor used to have. And it's a medium cost, fairly fast-moving mechanical unit. So it's pretty much just a smaller, faster version of the Thor. So it won't suffer from the two Thor problems that we mentioned before. But the main difference of the Warhound compared to the Thor is that it's got an anti-mechanical ground attack, which means if you're fighting against another Terran player who's using mostly factory-based units, this is a very powerful unit to use against that. And also against Protoss, because most of the Protoss ground units are mechanical units. In a straight-up mass situation, I think the only non-mechanical unit Protoss has is the Zealot. So this really allows us to move the Thor up into a different role. And the role that we chose for the Thor was the Limit 1, super high health, high burst damage, really easy to use, attack move friendly unit. So this really allows us to fulfill the fantasy of the Uber unit that the Mothership really couldn't fulfill back in Wings of Liberty. The Mothership had a lot of problems. It was slow moving. It was always the first target to kill because of the cloak ability. And it had a bunch of powerful spells, so if you didn't use those spells, the Mothership was not as powerful as it could be. So we're hoping that this new Thor really caters to that group of players that really want that Uber sort of unit. Yeah. And I'd just like to point out that this unit is definitely under construction, and in our internal playtests, this unit felt pretty strong, especially against Terran and Protoss, and against Mutalisks as well. But we just want to always look for more feedback on this guy. So if you get a chance to go out to the playtest stations and just check it out and give us feedback, that would be greatly appreciated. So in this first video, you'll see the Hellions and Warhounds going up against the more traditional Marine tank army. So the Marines and tanks are spread out pretty well. So the Hellions will go into the new battle mode, which would allow them to withstand the siege tank fire a lot easier, while the Warhounds are picking off the siege tanks using focus fire. They actually have 7 range, so they're pretty good at picking off siege tanks like this. So obviously, if all these siege tanks and Marines were packed up tightly into a choke point, there's no way this Hellion and Warhound army could push that line. But that's exactly what we wanted to go for. We wanted the more traditional Marine and siege tank army to be stronger at tighter chokes with heavily defended chokes, whereas the Hellions and Warhounds have the mobility advantage to fight against that in a different way.
Warhound turned out to be too strong on all fronts and it just couldn't fit the game. It was a cheap fix and a very generic all-purpose unit, which kind of filled every possible role on the battlefield and just was too OP, so it was simply removed. The last unit to be added to this composition was a Shredder, a defensive unit that could slow down and destroy anything in its area. It was later replaced for a Widow Mine, a cheap, versatile and efficient tool against anything that other races have. Even though Widow Mines were not a core unit of the mech army and tanks were still favored for obvious reasons, the introduction of this unit allowed Terran to obtain new harass tools as well as have better defense against flying units. Overall, in How to Do Swarm, the mech army got much stronger and it was played more often.
We're just in the end game here. Damaga. He's like, just can't break it, guys. Just can't break it.
And MVP was just smiling.
I guess he saw it over the monitor. All right. Well, that's...
The last option that became available was Ravens. Now you could mass them up and use them as the ultimate late-game weapon. However, this strategy would be pretty annoying and it created many painful stalemates in TVZ. Speaking of TVZ, Zerg players in every league always struggled against mech, and especially against impenetrable defenses that Terrans like to construct in every game. With the heavy nerf of Broodlords and Infestors, you needed something new to counter that. The first option was Viper, an easy fix against any mech army that pretty much allowed Zerg players to play Hydra and Ling armies thanks to Blinding Cloud and Abducts. But there was another beast that would soon become the root of all evil in StarCraft 2. It was the Swarm Host. You can check out my video about this unit and meta, but in short, it created 3 units that would easily stall any game. Mech army just couldn't move out to fight Swarm Hosts. but Swarm hosts were also often unable to break a good mech defense, which resulted in hour-long matches where both Zerg and Terran players struggled to do any decisive actions. In general, during How to Do Swarm, mech became more viable and useful, but it was still a risky choice in most matchups. While the buffs and new units certainly helped, the same could be said for other races that got new tools to keep mech in check. Apart from that, Bio playstyle still allowed for more initiative and pace setting, allowing pro players to utilize their APM and multitask in the best possible way. On the lower levels, however, mech became a solid choice, and it was a real pain for many players who faced it. But it wasn't really until Legacy of the Void when it became a true powerhouse. In the new expansion, Blizzard continued their course of making mech even greater, and this includes the addition of new units, abilities, many buffs to what used to be obsolete, and so on. But we'll go over it in part 2. That's it for today, thanks for watching, make sure to check out the StarCraft for Balance history video, and as usual, have a nice day and see you next time.